Good morning. It's a delight to be with you this morning, and as we consider the Independence Day weekend, July 4th, it's thrilling to be back in the U.S. I've just come back from Norway, and it was interesting because these great hymns that we've been singing, "The Mighty Fortress is Our God," when you think about all the theology in those hymns, and the one that Stephen just shared with us as well. The most northern Gothic cathedral in the world is Trondheim, Norway, just below the Arctic Circle. And I gave a flute concerto there just a few days ago. Has anyone been to Trondheim Cathedral? Good. You know how gorgeous it is. Well, history is filled with people whose hearts were for God. And this morning, while this isn't technically a sermon, more of a teaching, I'd like to talk a little about someone who had an enormous impact in history, and that's Charlemagne. And if you're German, you would know him as Karl der Grosser, or if you were Italian, you'd know him as Carlo Magno. Most of us use the French term for Charlemagne, and today I'd like to share a little bit about his incredible throne and its historical and biblical and Christian symbolism. The texts that we'll look at in the Bible, I'll just basically quote them. They're not very many. We're only going to be looking at 1 Kings chapter 10, 18 through 20, and a little bit of Matthew 27:35, which is the passion story of Christ on the cross. But let's go ahead and think about how these proceed in terms of something that maybe you have seen. I'm curious. Has anybody here been to Aachen and climbed up the stairs and seen Charlemagne's throne? Anyone? Good. A fair number of you have done so. So today, when we think about these, looking at the throne and the symbolism, this is a chapter, by the way, from a book a couple of years ago that I wrote on archaeology in the Bible. So it's maybe not the most biblical of chapters, but Charlemagne was an incredible person. And we'll look a little bit at his life and how he understood what he was supposed to be, partly as someone who represented Christ. This is Aachen. This is the cathedral. You can actually see it's been heavily Gothicized. The original part, which is about 800 AD, is just that little domed, octagonal, Byzantine-style building in the middle. And having been there on different occasions, this time I really wanted to see in 2019, a few years ago, more of that throne and how it represented biblical truths. So if you know the life of Constantine and his mother Helena, and if you've been to Jerusalem and been in the Holy Sepulchre, when I lived in Jerusalem, I've spent a lot of time in there, you can see why this is part of the story. And if you've seen the dome shots, meaning the treasure house of the cathedral, the dome as it's called, a lot of incredible things in there. And if you've also been to places in France, and I put in a little bit here from my dearest friend, Fred Conklin, because we've traipsed through these castles and done through a lot of sort of connecting with great Pinot Noir, some of the story here, because Charlemagne was here, mind you, before that castle. Although there's a Roman villa under the castle, and there was a Celtic oppidum fort underneath that. So some things are really historically deep. Now, in that castle, there are a lot of these medieval tiles, like this one. And I was asked to do an archaeological work there, trying to put the medieval stuff back together, knights and rabbits, fleur-de-lis, which, of course, as you know, the lily flower was part of Charlemagne's own heraldry, along with the sort of black eagle, the Schwarz Adler, because he's both German and French. If you look at the Rhine River, remember the Franks, the people that he was emperor of, give us France but it also gives us a lot of other words. So looking at some of these tiles, like the eagle tile, here is a statue of Charlemagne in Liège, Northern Europe. And when you look at the great chanson de geste, the war stories, the beautiful literature, the romantic stories that come out of Charlemagne and Roland, his nephew, and others, it's a pretty impressive legacy. He was considered the most Christian king of all time, and there are good reasons why. You can see him in stained glass windows all across Europe. You might know that he was canonized for a while, for a very short time. He was made a saint. Well, he was a saint because he was a believer, but he was literally given the name Saint Charlemagne. And you can see a lot of pictures. There is his little monogram, and if you look at it closely, you see Karolus in that monogram on the left. It's all through the streets of Aachen. Now, inside that reliquary is a piece of his skull. That's about all we have left of him, because everybody wanted a piece of him. Frederick Barbarossa, in fact, and many others, because they claimed descent from Charlemagne, they wanted to make sure they had some of his bones. And you can open the top of that reliquary up, and there's a little piece of his skull, as I said, about all that's left. There you see. Now, lots of coins minted in the Roman period because he was considered the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, neither really holy or Roman, but nonetheless, the story is that these Romanized coins show that he's perpetuating the idea of a Roman emperor. And if you've ever seen in the Church of St. Mary Hinton in Britain, you'll see Christ in a mosaic from the 4th century as a Roman emperor. So it's fascinating because the domain of Christ extends through eternity. The Empire of Rome has left, but Christ, emperor of all time, and Charlemagne saw part of his legacy as Romanization. Now, some of the words, I'm not sure you can read those words from where you're sitting. In fact, I probably can't either. But when you think of this, the word frank, his tribe, means to be blunt or direct. It also means to stamp with a seal, to frank something as a verb. In Arabic and Persian, the word frank basically was the word for European, Ferengi. In fact, we get the word foreigner from that word. And so on. We get frankincense because the Franks were commercially really savvy, and they took over the what we call Boswellia thorifera, that really fragrant scent that sometimes is used in worship because it's the symbol of visible prayer. It was also, as you know, the gift of the Magi to Jesus, Son of God, as visual prayer rising and fragrant and so on. So a lot of parts of this legacy. Frangistan was what the Near East called Europe. Frangistan. So a lot of legacy here. Now, another coin minted from his time. And here, as I said, he was canonized for a short time. One of the popes who canonized him was in France, and so that makes sense. And then he was decanonized by a following Italian pope. We'll have to see why he might have been decanonized. Was it just the Babylonian schism between France and Italy when the papacy was in France and Avignon for a short time? No, it's a little bit more complicated than that, as most things are. But his administration was incredible. Now, I don't think you can see all of these. You might see some of the images. But he sent all throughout his empire a duo of a knight and a cleric. These were the sent ones of the Lord, the missi dominici, a team of literally the church and the nobility went around checking on things. If you know the word count, my kids remembered Count Dracula, right? But count, the word count, it has a lot of meanings, but a count was how he divided the empire into counties. We're today in San Mateo County. I spent some time down south teaching about 20 miles south of here at the verge of San Mateo County and Santa Clara County. Spent 30 years crossing that county line. But notice the word comte in French, count in English, and comte in Italian all come from the people who administered those counties under Charlemagne. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about his administration, which was genius. He literally started what we call the Carolingian Renaissance. He endowed over 25 monasteries in Europe with scriptoria, meaning places where they could copy manuscripts. Because at that time, around 800, literacy was way low. My dear friend Tom Cahill wrote How the Irish Saved Civilization. You know that? The few people who could read and write in Europe were a few Irish monks, and some of them, and the ones in northern England, from Eboracum, York, sent Alcuin down to teach Charlemagne how to read. He was so joyfully wanting to learn how to read that he endowed all these monasteries, and we suddenly have scriptoria, writing of manuscripts, go up over 10,000% in a few years. Just everywhere, manuscripts being written and copied, thanks to Charlemagne's love for education. Well, I could go on, but let's get to a little bit. You can see part of the Frankish kingdom. You can see a little bit of the fact that people swore fealty to him. He sort of started the hierarchy of medieval feudalism, fealty, having faith, fidelitas in Latin, showing faith to the person over you in the administrative hierarchy. So a vassal to a knight, to a baron, and so on up the line, count, viscount, earl, duke, prince, king. So that fealty was important in administrative purposes. So he was really amazing, but his faith is well attested. You can't read all of this, but his biographer Einhard says that he went to church faithfully, and he gave a lot of money to the church. In fact, the church loved him so much that may be why they canonized him for a while, because he was very good to the people of God. And you can read a little bit in Einhard's biography at the middle here that he was a constant worshiper at church as long as he could. And then he rebuilt that cathedral that I showed you, Aachen Cathedral, and that's where his throne is. Now, because of his influence in raising education and literacy, as I said, we call it the Carolingian Renaissance, because literacy went from 0 to very high, considerably, relatively speaking, in his administration. It's very possible, had Charlemagne not come along, literacy could have been forgotten, except for a very, very few monks. So education, as we know it, owes a lot to him. And this is the great Stiftsbibliothek in St. Gallen, Switzerland. I've spent a fair bit of time there with books that go back to his time period, around 800. Manuscripts, incunabula, handwritten, manuscriptus, handwritten. So great libraries. This is one of the best ones in the world, endowed by Charlemagne at the beginning. So you may know the romantic literature of Don Quixote's pursuit of fantasies and windmills and El Cid's. I love this Gustave Doré engraving. It's actually in my office. As he's thinking about all the great deeds he wants to do like Charlemagne. And of course, you all know that Don Quixote is the alter ego of Miguel Cervantes. It's his own life that he's written about. Now, I won't talk about all these, but here are his 5 wives. Yes, 5 wives, not all at the same time. Generally, they passed away and he married a new one, but not always. Sometimes he had a marriage annulled because the Langobards in Italy were actually Arian Christians. That we might consider them heretics. But anyway, 5 wives, bore a lot of children. When we think about that, there's the cross of St. Desiderius, or Desiderius, King Desiderius, in Brescia, Italy. I've looked at it a lot. It's filled with Roman cameo jewels, reuse. Now, he also had 5, shall we say, concubines wherever he traveled, because he was in the saddle a lot. Are you beginning to wonder why he was decanonized? Anyway, may have been his weakness, but he traveled. Now, how many of us in the room can trace our lineage back to Charlemagne? Probably over half of us, because he had a lot of kids. He had 20 children, and he gave them all great positions. And this was when, as an abbot or an abbess, you could actually kind of be married. Pope Gregory's idea about celibacy wasn't really adhered to then. Maybe still not, but anyway. When you look at how many generations since Charlemagne, 48 generations and so on, it's possible that 50 million people around the world are descended from Charlemagne. And he took good care of his kids. All right? So, descent from Charlemagne, you may be descended from Charlemagne, and you can probably easily prove it. If you have land, if you have education, if you have means, if you have substance, how entitled are we anyway? Probably pretty entitled. Can we trace it all the way back? Possibly. Now, let's go back to Aachen. Let's climb the stairs there in that beautiful Byzantine-style church, because this was the canon of the day. This was how you represented things, with all the treasures there. There is even the horn of Roland. It's really not. Remember that horn that could call Charlemagne from leagues away? Well, it's called Oliphant, which is one of the words for ivory from elephant, but it's not really Roland's horn, but it's said to be. There is his sword, Joyeuse, in the Louvre. I won't go into a lot of detail, but this was a holy sword. Now you might ask, why was it called Joyeuse? Well, because, this is a little tricky, it let the blood of infidels out. So it was joyful at basically sort of onward Christian soldiers idea. We may not resonate with that. There's the great Le Roi Soleil, the Sun King. What is he really showing you that he's carrying on his nice gambe there? He's carrying Joyeuse, Charlemagne's sword, because all French monarchs were coronated with this sword. Even Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson, dear friends, they wrote about these in Peter and the Swords of Mercy. There's a guy in this book who works for the British Museum, and he helped save the world. His name was Patrick Hunt, so they wrote me into the story, which I'm very grateful for, but a little embarrassed at times. So Poul Anderson, you may know his great story about 3 hearts and 3 lions. I mean, the heraldry of Charlemagne and the literature about Charlemagne is just vast. Here is a great stained glass window. If you've seen the Chartres stained glass windows, there's Roland with Durandal. There he's breaking the sword, or trying to, because he doesn't want it to fall into the hands of the infidels. Some of these swords, the sword of Charlemagne, Durandal, Cortana, the coronation sword of England, are called holy swords of Christendom. In the right hands, as Christ's representative, these kings were supposed to be wielding justice. There is what may be left of Roland's sword stuck in a wall down in Provence. Now, I spent a fair bit of time analyzing this sword, but now, does that look like a king's throne to you? Wouldn't you expect some gold? Wouldn't you expect some jewels? Why is this throne made of sort of stone that has been polished by a lot of touch? It has 6 steps. There's 1 black step at the bottom, and then 5 steps. And if you look closely, some of those steps were carved out of Roman columns. And all around it, all around that throne, you see a hollow space in the middle, because all the royalty of Europe crawled underneath that throne. They would get down on their hands and knees and pay fealty to Charlemagne's legacy by crawling through that little area. In fact, there is a small relic of Saint Stephen associated with this throne as well, which is still in the Kaiserdom Schatz, the treasury of the Church of Aachen. Now, there it is. The floor is fascinating, because all around it on the floor are the stones of Roman emperors. If you can see them, there's imperial porphyry, which is purple, lapis lacudominus, which is green, from Sparta, the purples from Egypt, the orangey yellow threaded ones, marbled, is from Carthage, etc., etc. All these stones are associated with Roman emperors from the time of Trajan and Hadrian onward, basically about the year 100 AD onward. Why would Charlemagne have the stones of emperors on his throne? What's he recalling? He's definitely showing his, at least, kinship, if not by genealogy. He's showing his kinship by office. He's the Holy Roman Emperor. So he better have those imperial stones around his throne. This is what you see in the Pantheon in Rome. Same exact stones. The stone of Roman emperors. There it is. Now, let's analyze this throne closely. This is a Darmstadt Universität image of the throne of Solomon, with the hands of God and of God the Father and Christ reaching out. The throne of Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 10, 18 and 19 says, here we can read it, King Solomon made a great ivory throne, overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the back of the throne was rounded. Do you see the resemblance physically? If you look at this throne of Charlemagne, it is exactly an echo of the throne of Solomon. 6 steps, the rounded back, but it's not ivory, it's not gold. In fact, it may be more precious than ivory and gold. If we think about what all this means, this imperium in this throne, why would Solomon want to be sitting, as it were, on an echo, an illusion, an allegory of Solomon's throne? Because Solomon was the wisest person in the world. Charlemagne wanted to channel that wisdom. And there's no question that this was a connection he made, as did his administrators. So now it was called the seat of wisdom, in Latin, sedis sapientiae. And how many great universities in Europe have the seat of wisdom in their sigillium, in their seal? I was a visiting fellow at Heidelberg University a few years ago, and so I felt I could buy one of those T-shirts that said Heidelberg University on it because I was actually officially there, so I bought one. And that's the seat of wisdom, and then last year I gave a lecture in Munich at Ludwig Maximilian University. So it also has the seat of wisdom on the seal, as do these others, Freiburg, Leipzig, etc. Many universities in Europe have the seat of wisdom because they're supposed to be, as the seat of wisdom and academic excellence, channeling Solomonic wisdom. And that's exactly what Charlemagne meant with partly in this throne. Now, let's go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. This is basically a 6th century, about 500s AD, map of Jerusalem in the Roman era. And if you look closely at it, I lived, by the way, just on the bottom corner for quite a while there in Jerusalem when I was studying archaeology as a graduate student. But you have this long line in the middle of the city. You have a wall around it. But the building that you see offset kind of at the bottom with 3 parts that does look like the Pantheon of Rome with the dome, that was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, started by Helena, the mother of Constantine. She, according to stories, found fragments of the true cross. Well, I'm not so sure that's really true. Voltaire said that you could build a road all the way from Paris to Berlin with fragments of the true cross. So I'm not that gullible, but there are lots of reliquaries with fragments of the true cross, because Helena said she found the real cross. There at the Morgan Library, if you know, in New York City, I was there in November taking photos, and there you can see Helena in the back left with her halo because she's canonized, and there is her bishop, Lignus. You can see Episcopus, Lignus. Episcopus means one who has oversight, so the same as an elder, a presbyter. So there he is, and notice she's found the true cross, and it even has the little, on the green cross, it has the plate that said, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, I-N-R-I on it. Do you see that cross? That was the true cross. And what is it doing? According to the Latin text here, it says, mortuus suscitat. He's resurrecting, this bishop is resurrecting somebody from the dead because he has the true cross. Well, I kind of identify with that. I've never seen fragments of the true cross that I can guarantee, but I've been resurrected from the dead, from the life of sin to the life of following Christ. And ultimately, I believe 100% that my body will be resurrected in Christ. So this was a legend that she found the true cross, and then she built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre around the spot. There it is. That's more of the later version of the church. You can see that it was outside Jerusalem at the time of Christ, because you couldn't kill people inside the city and then bury them inside the city. So it was outside the original city. And there it is today, sort of, that church building you're looking at is about 1,000 plus years old. But the original church, there you can see the side cutaway view, and the shrine is in the background on the left. And inside that shrine, there you see one of the Orthodox priests walking by it. That shrine is definitely from the time of Helena, the mother of Constantine, meaning about 327 or so AD, so 1700 years old. And if you look down in if you get into the shrine, National Geographic did a huge scientific study recently on this, and I've worked on some of that study, where they actually go to the altar, and the stone that is there's a tomb inside the shrine. Jesus isn't there, no bones, but it was considered the holiest spot in all of Christendom, because this is where Jesus resurrected. Now, there's what Golgotha used to look like. There was a quarry there. On the left is the tomb with the circle. In the middle is Golgotha, which, as you know in Aramaic, means, the place of the skull. It becomes Calvarias in Latin, Calvary. Well, there it is. And the Emperor Hadrian was tired of Christians going to worship there and to signify their devotion to Christ. So he had literally a temple built over it, filled in the quarry. And so he built his temple over it. Now, there's the cutaway of what it looks like today. There's literally a quarry and Golgotha and the tomb there. And the shrine is over that tomb. It's all been cut out today. Well, if you're walking through the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, none of that bedrock is around you. But here's what Hadrian did. You see, he built a temple over it with Roman marble, where Roman soldiers worked and played. So there it is today. Now, according to tradition and scientific analysis, Charlemagne's throne is made from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre marble. Could you imagine a more powerful statement than to have your throne be where Christ was buried and resurrected? Wow. And on the side of that throne, there's a little inscription. You may not be able to see. Can you see sort of angular straight lines? That's a game board. Somebody was playing a game there. Soldiers in the Roman Empire played games with little game pieces. These are some that I excavated in Europe. These are game pieces that were played literally on that slab. Not when it was up as it is today, but when it was flat. What's the connection here? Some of you are already way ahead and you see what the connection is. When did soldiers cast lots, play games under the cross? Remember Matthew 27:35, when they were casting lots for Christ's garments. So people who came to see this throne said, this is where the Roman soldiers cast lots for Christ's garment. Here's the evidence physically for it. Now, that's not easily provable. I wouldn't bet my life on it, but it's the power of perception here. Charlemagne sits on a throne that echoes Solomon's throne, and the stone from his throne comes from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the most sacred spot in all of Christianity, where Jesus was buried and resurrected. What more powerful connections could you have than to say, my throne is a holy place, not because of me, but because of what happened there. And those people believed it because they believed in the death of Jesus for us and in the resurrection of Jesus for us. So here's a king who was no doubt, every time he climbed up on that throne, both exhilarated by seeing the tradition, but also humbled by knowing the footsteps in which he walked. Jesus' shoes were too big to fill. So, you can see the Roman soldiers gaming for Christ's garments and a lot of icons and images. But the fact that Charlemagne's throne echoes the most sacred moments in history is important. And whether true or not, the analysis of this has been pretty well confirmed that these slabs come from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Whether or not that's where the Romans cast lots for his garments isn't really necessary. The power of perception says that putting all this together for Charlemagne said that he was a person of faith and wanting to be wise like Solomon and wanting to sit where Jesus sat up and was resurrected was really important to Charlemagne. It drove Charlemagne's administrative zeal, and it drove Charlemagne's, shall we say, empireship to know that he represented all that he could of biblical wisdom and Christ in his kingship. And he was humbled by it, and he was a man of prayer. Now, I've touched the throne, but I haven't sat on it. I wouldn't dare. But Charlemagne's throne and its biblical symbolism are clear. Thank you for letting me share just a little bit about history. It wasn't a sermon, but Charlemagne still speaks to us from that throne. Thank you.